that we've got Photoshop open here, let's go ahead and we'll create a new file. We don't want it to be 4K. Let's just go HD. We'll go 1920 for the width by 1080. That should work just fine for us. We want to be in RGB because we're on a computer screen, and we'll create that. All right, so what image do we want to drop in here? Well, let's pop on over to Firefly here. I've already generated a couple of things, and I found something that I like. So I wanted basically just a scene of a lake with some mountains and then a tree in the foreground. So the prompt I used for this was cartoon style image of a lake with mountains in the background. The lake is seen from a hill in the foreground. Half of a thick tree trunk is visible on the right side of the foreground. And this, I had to iterate just a little bit, right? I finally found something I liked, which was this one here. And then I upscaled it, downloaded it, and that's what I'm going to be using today. And by the way, I guess I should mention this. Since Firefly is an Adobe product, you can actually use it with your Creative Suite license. So this is one of the reasons why I've chosen to use this today, because if you're already working in Photoshop and After Effects, you should have access. But anyway, yes, this is the image I chose. So let's get that into Photoshop so we can make something happen with it. So I'm going to locate my image here, Lake 1, that's what I called it. We're going to get it in there, and I don't mind stretching this a little bit just to fill our space. There we go. Okay, so we've got our image into Photoshop. As always, our first step is going to be to rasterize this so that we can actually work with it. And then something that I like to do is, before I start manipulating an image in any way, I like to just go ahead and duplicate it. We can call it Lake 1 copy, that's fine. And we'll go ahead and turn off this original so that we're only looking at the duplicate. So now that we've got our image in here and duplicated and we feel good about getting started, let's talk about our goal one more time. So again, we're trying to isolate the foreground and the middle ground and the background from one another. So first we have to decide what those things are. So for our image, we could say all of this stuff here plus this tree probably, that can all be our foreground. Our midground we can say is all this water plus these first kind of green rolling hills, and then our background can be all of the sky and all of these desaturated mountains back there. We'll probably end up just getting rid of these branches here just to make things a little bit easier for us, because we don't really need them to achieve the effect that we're looking for. So how do we actually do this? Well, there's not just one way. There's lots of ways. But essentially, we want to create a selection around each three elements that we just described. So our foreground, midground, and our background. I tend to use the polygonal lasso tool for this because it allows you to do some really fine-tuned angles and things like that. But there's also just the regular lasso tool that some people like, so you can do a quick first pass around something. You could try and select a color range here. There's lots of ways to do it. I personally am going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to start by just clicking around and basically outlining all of our foreground that we just talked about. As you can see, I'm starting to do that here. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this video up for you all, and I will check back in after I have my foreground selection. So here is our foreground selection. So everything within these marching ants, is what that black and white line is called, is actually going to be our foreground. Now, if we take a closer look, I tried to do a pretty good job, but it's definitely not perfect. I'm missing some of the foliage down here. We've got some of the holes in the trees, still have the water looking through them. So little things like that get kind of tough to get rid of, especially when you look at something like this pine tree here. Getting rid of all of that blue is going to be pretty tough, and it would take a long time. So for the purposes of our little experiment today, I'm not going to take the time to actually do that because, like I said, it would take lots and lots of time. But basically we have our foreground selected here and we're pretty happy with it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually save this whole selection. Now I accidentally did this off camera, so I'll just save it again under a different name. So if you go to select up here at the top and then click on save selection, you can give it a name. I've already named one foreground, so I will call this foreground 1, and then you just hit OK. So now we can see if we deselect, we're like, oh no, oh my gosh, I just spent all that time selecting all this and now it's gone. Don't worry, you can go to select, load selection, and you can change, you can select whichever one you've saved, and boom, you've got it back. So now that we've got that selection saved for the future, we're going to want to actually cut this foreground out of our whole picture. So with our lasso tool selected, if we have that tool actually selected, then we can right click within our selection and we'll see two options here, layer via copy and layer via cut. We're going to want to actually cut this out. So we're going to choose layer via cut, and what that's done is it's given us just the foreground isolated from everything else. In addition to that, it has also left us with the mid and background with the foreground cut out. Now this is a good thing for us to take a moment and look at here, because we know what our end goal is, right? We want to actually scroll the background and the foreground against one another. So if they're going to move relative to one another, let's see how that's going to look. Uh-oh. Now we're starting to see an issue, right? Sure, we've isolated our foreground, but then there's nothing behind it. Whoops. Then there's nothing behind it, right? So we've got to come up with some way to actually fix that. And once again, there's a number of ways we could go about doing this, but for right now, I'm going to just turn our foreground off, and we're going to start thinking about our midground. So basically, if I grab my paintbrush again, we want to get all of this water, and then for this image in particular, we want to grab these kind of green saturated hills there. But we also need to fill all of this space with water too. So in order to do that, we're going to try a couple of different things out here. Let's go ahead and start by duplicating this layer. Okay, so we can call this, maybe we'll name it mid 1 and mid 2 just to try and stay organized. So for right now, let's work with mid 1. And the first technique we're going to try is we're going to try a content aware fill. So to do that, let's go ahead and select all of the spaces that are currently empty, but we want to eventually be filled with water. So we'll grab all of this here. So basically everything in this selection should be water, right? So with our mid 1 layer selected, and all of our soon to be water selected, let's come up here to edit. Let's come down to content aware fill. And what this technique does is it basically samples parts of your image and uses information from those samples to predict and calculate what the rest of an image should look like. So this is actually, what this is giving us here is actually not too bad. I think it could be a lot worse, right? So we can always play around with this. We can get rid of some of these samples up in the grass and in the tree areas and these limbs. We don't need to sample those. Get rid of some of that maybe. Maybe we'll get rid of all of the grass and trees. It does have something weird going on here around the edge of the sample. We can try and maybe grab, if we hold Option, we can add to our selection, so we can grab more of the water if we want. Don't necessarily love that. But this isn't terrible, so let's run with this for now. So we're going to go ahead and hit Apply, and that'll show us what we've got here, and then we can just hit OK. And then we can deselect, and there's some more water for us. Right, so it got rid of some of that we selected and replaced it with this water here. Now it's not perfect, but for what we're trying to do, which is just scroll this across. Whoops, that was the wrong layer. Scroll this across, excuse me. Once we scale this up, we now have water behind it to fill in those gaps. Because the content-aware fill actually worked really well for us here, I think we're just going to run with that, and I'll actually show you the second technique for healing this part of the midground. So where we have a big gap in this kind of green hill covered in pine trees over here. So we can still ignore our mid 2 layer for now. We might not even need it. But with mid 1 selected, I'm going to grab my polygonal lasso, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select, I'm going to outline the edge of the water there and then grab some of this hill, and I'm going to come on up and we're going to say that our hill comes all the way up here, and that's going to be the shape of this hill that we want to put in. And we're going to actually use the generative fill option for this. So you can either click it right here, or you can go to Edit, Generative Fill. I'm just going to click it here on this easy access bar, and we're going to tell this what we want it to make. We're going to give it a prompt. So I'm just going to say something like grassy hills covered in pine trees. So we're going to give it that prompt, excuse me, and we're going to give it a little bit of time to kind of think here and process. And what it's going to do is it's going to generate a number of options for us based on what's happening around this area in the picture. So what we see here is kind of our first option that it's showing us. And it's not filling in everywhere we wanted it to, but that might be okay. It actually looks pretty good over here for the most part. I'm actually pretty happy with that. So we can click through our options, and we can also try to just generate again. Get some more options for us here. And it will actually save, it will retain these first 3 options that it gave you. So then you can look through all 6. You're not going to just lose your first one if you try again. So here we have something kind of crazy going on. It's a little better, and then back to crazy again. So I think this was really our best option here. It still needs some work, but I think we can make it work for us. Because I actually really like this part here. So we're going to say this is what we're going to use. So the way we're going to use it is first we're actually going to, I'm going to delete our mid 2 layer, and I'm going to, once again, I'm going to make a copy of mid 1. Okay, so we're going to save our mid 1 here. I'm going to just turn it off, and we're going to merge our new layer that is our grassy hills and our mid 1 copy layer. So we're going to select both of them, right click, and we are going to merge layers, or Command E or Control E if you're on PC. So now we have all of that as one layer here. That's great for us. But we still have a little bit of work to do. So we wanted our hill to actually follow kind of this line here, and we can still make that happen. So I'm going to grab my clone stamp tool. I'm going to bring this brush size down. I'm going to bring my hardness down a little bit. And maybe we even want the trees to continue up this line of this hill. So let's select somewhere in our trees, and let's just start kind of copying this stuff over like this. Right? It's not going to look perfect, but it should get us close to something that we can really start to work with. And the more we kind of work on it, the better we can get it to look, the more kind of creative liberties we can actually take with it, right? So I'm gonna maybe follow this kind of ridge line here and give us a little definition. And I don't hate that, you know? I think that's, maybe we'll get a little more definition going on there. And then we'll give it something like, something like that maybe. Okay, that's not too bad. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab an eraser. Once again, I'm going to bring this down. I actually want the hardness on the brush this time. Whoops. And we're just going to come in here and give ourselves a little bit more of a defined edge to work with. So something like that. Again, it's not perfect, but for our purposes, we just need something to fill that space behind this tree. Whoops. Behind this tree, right? So as we move that, we're only going to see about that much. That looks fine. That looks fine. Once we heal that sky, we're going to be in pretty good shape here. The last thing we're going to want to do to our midground is actually isolate it from the background, just like we did with our foreground here. So let's get our foreground out of the way. And since we've already defined what our edge is going to be, now all we have to do is select it and do another layer via cut. So I'm going to grab my polygonal lasso tool. I'm going to go ahead and make this selection. I'm going to save it. I'm going to get a layer via cut going, and then I'll check back in with you. Now that I've made my midground selection and saved it, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to actually load it. And then I am going to create a layer via cut. And that leaves us with just the sky and just the midground. So I'm going to go ahead and rename our layers here. Let's stay organized if we can. So this layer 1 is going to be foreground, and it's ready to go. Layer 2 we can go ahead and call midground, because it is also ready to go. Now here's the start of our background layer. So we can go ahead and start healing and expanding this as we see fit. First thing I actually want to do to this background is I want to go ahead and get these branches out of here. I don't want to deal with them. I don't think we need them. So let's go ahead and try and get those out. So I'm going to start with my clone stamp tool here with the correct layer selected. I'm going to get my brush up a little bigger, hardness way down. Yeah, something like that. And let's try maybe right in here. We can grab something like that. I'll go ahead and lighten all of that up. I think that's okay. We can darken it again. So we're just gonna really get some rough passes in here. We can actually try and we can go ahead and try and fill in most of this sky just with this clone stamp technique. We can bring some of the clouds back in if we want. Maybe we put another one of these here. It started to look a little messy. Let's grab some of that, carry it over. So I'm going to continue this process until I get these branches out of the way, and then I'll check back in. I went through and I healed out all the branches. I extended the sky through our gap here, and using the same clone stamping tool, I went ahead and extended all these mountains as well. So basically I just took whatever little texture was sticking up, sampled that, and drug it down like so that I could have more room to play around when we get our parallax started. So that's what I've done here. And now this is going to make for a pretty good background for us. And it's already isolated, so we don't have to cut it out of anything, but we do want to go ahead and rename it to background so we can keep our layers straight. And it is, as it should be, our bottom layer at the moment. So we'll click on our foreground, or our midground, excuse me, and see how that layers in nicely with those mountains. And now that we have the extra mountains to play with, if we want to move this at all, we have that option, right? So that's where healing really becomes our friend. Then we can turn our foreground on and we look like we're pretty much back to normal, except we can move and we don't see the cutouts here. We can move our midground and we don't see cutouts anywhere over there, right? So now we have everything isolated and healed the way we want it, essentially. So our next step is going to be just to export each of these layers separately and get them into Photoshop. So, into After Effects. So if we just turn our background layer off, we can see our transparency grid here, and that's how we're going to want to export these images. So I'm going to get these exported and into After Effects, and I'll see you there. So I have our project open here in After Effects 2024, and we have all of our healed images exported and ready to go. So now it's time to get started with some animation. So we're going to want to create a new composition. Something I like to do in all of my After Effects projects is I just come over here and I make a folder, label it comps for compositions, and then I make another one for sources, just to try and stay organized. But we're going to create a new composition. We're going to make it 1920 by 1080 because that's the size we made our images. Let's make this just 30 seconds. That'll give us plenty of time, along with some wiggle room, so we can kind of play around and see what duration we like for our parallax. And let's go ahead and name this something that makes sense. We can call it segment parallax, and we'll hit OK, and there we have our new composition. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to actually get the images we just created into After Effects. So wherever you save those images to, mine are here, you can select them all, drag them into your sources folder or just anywhere in this panel here, and then they're ready to go for you. So we're going to drag all of those into our new composition. So what we're seeing right now is just our orders aren't layered correctly, and since we've named them in a way that makes sense, we know that we can put our foreground on top, our background on bottom, and there we go. So now everything is in order, and it's time to actually play around with some animation and see if we can get a parallax that kind of feels good for us. So the basic principles here are we're just going to want to move our foreground in one direction. We can say maybe we're going to move this from right to left on our screen. And at the same time that that's happening, we're going to want our background to move from left to right, like this. So as we're looking at that, we can already see a potential problem for us that we're going to have to work around. And that is that we don't have enough image to actually scroll across and keep seeing the image, right? We run out, we get this space over here. One quick way to get around that is simply to scale it up. So if we take our foreground layer, we can even isolate that so we just see that. And we can just scale it up here. Make it a little bigger, right? So I'm going to go to about 115 on the scale. I think that's going to be plenty. And then we can look at, maybe we're going to want to see more or less of it. So let's unsolo that. That looks pretty good to me. Maybe we want it a little higher, right? If we want it to be perfectly aligned with the bottom, we can open our align drop down over here. And we can just make sure we're aligning to composition and align to the bottom. So now we're right there. I might actually want it a little bit lower. Something like that I think feels pretty nice. Now we're going to want to move this from our right side over to our left side. So let's go ahead and start with just aligning it all the way to the left. That can be a starting point for us. And maybe we want to bring it in about that far. I'm going to start, I'm seeing something weird right over here with the water, right? So I'm just going to choose to go ahead and cover that up in the beginning. So we're going to start right there. So I'm going to drop a keyframe in for position right on our first frame, right here for our foreground. And that's going to work pretty good for us. So now let's look at the background. Since we are wanting to move our foreground from right to left, that means we're going to want to move our background from left to right. So we can take a look at that. We can go ahead and drag this over a little bit somewhere over here. We'll say that's good. We can drop our keyframe in there. Then I'm going to unsolo, and we can see everything still kind of lines up. This looks fine. Okay. So now we want to actually start moving these relative to one another. So let's just pick a time. Let's say maybe 15 seconds will work for us. And then I'm going to actually start with our foreground here with this layer. And we're wanting to scroll this again right to left. So I'm just going to drag this position over here to the left. And we're going to come all the way. Maybe we'll just align it. And we'll say that's where we're going to want to stop. Okay, so now we get this kind of scrolling motion on the foreground there. And that's pretty good. So if we unsolo it and we take a look, now we have our foreground just moving across everything in the scene. And it's moving from right to left. So our background, if we solo that, we're going to want to move from left to right. So again, we can just drag that position over this way. Maybe we'll start by aligning it, and we'll just see if that works for us. So if we unsolo, now we can take a look at everything, and we can see that it's moving against each other just like we want. So if we watch it in real time, we can gauge the speed. Now this feels fast to me. Particularly the background, I think, is moving a lot quicker than I would like. So that's an easy fix. We can just move this back over to the left a bit. Take a look again. And that's starting to feel a lot more natural, I think. I might even want a little bit less movement there. Maybe we come somewhere in there. And this is good. Our background is moving more slowly than our foreground, which makes sense, because if we had a camera moving over here, this distance traveled is going to be greater than that distance traveled because of the distance. And I think 15 seconds works well. It feels smooth, it feels natural. So if we come out to this last keyframe, we can set our work area and define it. So you can either click and drag, or you can just hit in on your keyboard, and that will set your end point at wherever your time indicator is. And then if we want to actually trim this composition to the length of our work area, we can hit Command-Shift-X or Control-Shift-X if you're on PC, and that'll do that for us. So now we can watch our whole animation in real time. And I think it looks good. So now we've actually created a parallaxed image by segmenting it and healing it in Photoshop and then animating it in After Effects. So this is a great way to go about doing this. It gives you a lot of control and a lot of room to take creative liberties by healing your artwork and things like that. But it does take a lot of time. We saw that that was a time-intensive process, right? And we still are, if we had spent even more time on it, we could have gotten these areas to look a little better, but it would be really hard to get it to look perfect. So this is the, I guess, first stage of this tutorial. We've completed it. Great job. You've now made a parallax. And you've done it using techniques that are really good to know because, like I said, they give you a lot of agency over what you're doing. But in our next segment, we're going to look at a way to actually speed this process up. You don't have quite as much room for control in the process, but it does help when you have some complex art going on, right? Like some complex foliage or anything that it's really hard to heal. It can actually help with that. And so in our next segment, we're going to take a look at how we can actually do this using the Depth Scanner plugin.